Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. Midlife, that time that we find the biggest challenge when it comes to changing the direction of our lives because for some reason we find we're not very satisfied with how things have been. Well, joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is a wonderful guest who is an author, intuitive medium, and conscious creator who is passionate about helping people to wake up to their greatness. She also likes to support others as they navigate their own journey into consciousness to experience aliveness, offering private readings, intuitive coaching, small business coaching, Reiki sessions, and teaching workshops. She also has several books. Her newest one, 28 Days to a New You, is going to talk about that very thing, about what we can do, the necessary inner work, and that it's a journey into consciousness. We'll also learn ways of letting go of the painful past to live a full life in the present with authenticity. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Shelley Wilson. Shelley, thank you for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Daniel. I'm absolutely delighted to have a conscious conversation with you today.
Now, what does it mean to be conscious? We hear this so much. I mean, there's so many people out there talking about it. Are most of us just like zombies? Are we really literally hypnotized as we walk through our day?
Well, as you're saying that, I'm smiling, I'll say. And I will say that some people, from my perspective, go through life on autopilot. They exist rather than live. They're not fully aware of what it is that they're doing. And, you know, with that being said, I feel like being conscious, we are in tune. We're in the present moment. We're paying attention to those people that come into our life, the synchronicities, those things that are happening. So it's not necessarily, shall I say, that people are better or anything like that. I just feel like we're more in tune to life and what's happening, and we are creating consciously.
So people tend to really live more reactively than proactively, don't they?
I agree, and a word that I like to use also, Daniel, is people tend to react versus respond even. You know, the word react is kind of a harsh-sounding word when we say it, and respond is softer, it's gentler. And I think the more that we can be in that flow, working with that feminine energies versus the masculine, whether we're male or female, we're able to allow ourselves to step back for a moment and say, well, you know, what's really going on? What is the situation truly about?
Now, first of all, let's find, how did all this begin for you?
Well, I was always a very sensitive child growing up. I was raised in the Baptist faith, and my dad's a civil engineer, so I was seen and heard, but not always allowed that opportunity to say what I feel. You know, I definitely recognize when we cultivate in our children that opportunity of opinions, you know, it's very important. And so I grew up very sensitive and with this knowingness, but I really didn't have anyone to talk to. And it wasn't until 2008 when I had my proverbial aha light bulb wake-up moment when things really started moving. And I became attuned to Reiki and was practicing that. And then my psychic abilities really became enhanced, and that's when I realized I was also able to communicate with those that had passed.
Oh, that's just so interesting. You say something that's so poignant for people to understand is a lot of times we live from the rules that were set for us as we were children, and a lot of times we forget about that. I think we feel that when we move into adulthood we have this freedom or perceived freedom, but the fact is a lot of us tend to kind of continue forward with the change that bind us from years and years before.
I agree, and you know, whether we call it culture, conditioning, society, you know, the first thing that comes into my awareness is even the products we use in our home. We tend to utilize what our parents utilize, and you know, something like that can be very simple, but it's things like, well, let's try something different, let's do something different. And I really love Don Miguel Ruiz's book, The Four Agreements, which really helps us to step outside of that conditioning, so to speak, and allow ourselves to remove those restrictions and have the courage to step into our own.
Now, why do you think it's so difficult for people to make a change? You talk in your book how, generally speaking, you know, of course your book is titled 28 Days to a New You, but generally it's said that well, it takes an average of about 30 days for a person, if they want to make a change, to see that change realized and more set. Well, why does it take 30 days or 28 days, whatever the case may be?
I really don't think it takes that long, but I think people are a creature of habit. And I think what happens is, and I'll tell you, the secret to my book, so to speak, is just shifting your perception, allowing yourself to see things from a higher soul perspective, from that heart space energy, versus that lower vibration energy where we have fear and worry and lack and any of those other heavier emotions. But I think it takes time, primarily because we do tend to have habit, and we have to begin doing things differently. And sometimes it's very easy to do, but more often than not, we may feel a little discomfort of doing things outside of what is our norm.
I think what's really good for our listeners to know about your book, 28 Days to a New You, is, first of all, I was really surprised by its size. And generally when you see books of this size, they're usually the better ones.
Right.
And what I like about it is that as you read this, as you see what the intention is from the book, is that it isn't so much that it takes 30 days or whatever the case is to make that change, in as much as what you do during that time.
Right. And I will tell you, this book actually started out as a course with the Daily Om called Stop Existing and Start Living. And my guide said, you know what, some people don't like the responsibility of a course. Convert it to a book, and people may read it. And the reason the book is short, so to speak, there's, it's one of those things that you could sit down and read it in an hour or two if you want to. But the thing is sometimes less is more. And I feel like more often than not, less is more. So it's like, let's give the structure, the basics, and then I also give people questions to consider and tools to assist them along the way. So each chapter in this book, each day, gives you a topic that you can focus on. And whether you read it front to back, or one day at a time, or you decide to just open the book and decide, well, what do I need to know today? There's going to be some information for you.
See, and what makes that good is, to me, the feeling you get as you, let's say, work through this book, if you actually do the work. Many people, they pick up a book for change, they go for a couple of days. I mean, look at how many people really don't successfully complete their New Year's resolutions. Like you said before, their new habits, sometimes those are really, really hard to shake off the old ones. And so you find yourself thinking, God, this just takes too much effort. Why do we feel that way, sometimes even physically?
Well, I think, what happens is there's a lot of fear. People, once again, are used to what they're used to, and then when they step outside of doing something outside of their box, so to speak, and even stepping into the unknown at times, I think that is what can hold them back. But I think, allowing ourselves to let go, and I will say, Daniel, that this time, and it's hard to believe that, we're already almost 30 days into this new year, but when we step back and say, each day is a new beginning, and when we step into that energy of saying, I want something different. I may not know what it looks like, but I know I want to feel different. And even shedding the old. I'm a firm believer in clearing that energy field, clearing our chakras, cutting those energetic cords, but then also physically energy, things in our space, things that don't feel good. By shifting that, even removing items, donating, discarding, things like that, we can so easily shift that vibration around us. And even so, we take that application and apply it to our thoughts.
Now, I know that you like talking about what is known as consciously creating. And I found that really interesting to hone in on, because when you think about sometimes the routines we go about doing in a day, for instance, you may be at home, you need to wash the dishes or do the laundry, how we tend to do those things with one foot into the work and the other foot in another direction. You can't wait to be somewhere else. And I remember that myself, I used to be that way quite a bit, and I realized, how often do I kind of approach my creating, whatever it may be, whether it's work or actually creating something, with that same attitude that I'd rather be somewhere else. And I realized that as I began just shifting that simple thing to where, why don't I be present until this particular thing is done? No, nothing else in the world right now matters except completing this. And I found not only did I do things faster, but I was also more thorough, and I started enjoying the task, even if it was something as mundane as folding your underwear, for instance.
I know, and I will tell you, you are right on target, Daniel, because that is mindfulness. That is being in the present moment. Teacher Thich Nhat Hanh is a wonderful teacher for us in that regards. And what it is in anything that we're doing, in any task, whatever it may be, whether it's something we enjoy or not so much, cleaning the house, folding clothes, that kind of thing, if we're in that moment and enjoying what we're doing, we're allowing ourselves, first of all, to be present. And in doing so, whatever's happened in the past, whatever may happen in the future, our energy's not there. Our energy's in the now, being present, fully present, and that is where we consciously create. So in order to do that, we have to be aware also of our energetic emissions, that thoughts, words, actions, what it is that we're putting out into the universe, because that's like a radio transmission that we're putting out. So when we do have things on our mind and concerns and worries, feel into it, think about it, but then let it go and move into a space of a clear mind, or begin focusing on what it is that you want to create. That's how the law of attraction works. What you focus on, you create more of.
I have had many conversations about the law of attraction with wonderful people around the world just like yourself. And it's really interesting when you pay attention to that. A lot of people tend to believe, well, I hear about this law of attraction. These are the things I would like to have in my life. I don't see them happening, or at least they don't seem to be happening in the way that I would like them to. And I finally came to a realization that if you truly pay attention, I mean really pay attention, mindfulness is what we were talking about here just a moment ago, is the law of attraction is working all day, every day. The question is, what are you attracting to yourself? And you certainly have those kind of exercises to start paying attention. What are my thoughts? As you were saying, what is my radio frequency transmitting out there to the universe? And you might be surprised at how often you're getting exactly what you wanted.
Exactly. And, a great example to help us to learn from that, too, is when we have interactions with other people or experiences, and sometimes, it's not all the case, I have to say that as well, but sometimes people are going to reflect back to us that energy we're putting out. Sometimes what happens, they're going to reflect an experience or a lesson that we need to learn from. So I think always being aware, and once again, this is being conscious and paying attention, it's going to help us to learn from that. But I think sometimes we also get stuck in thinking what we think it should look like. We have those preconceived notions or expectations, and what's really happening is universe is showing us that energy we're putting out, more so that feeling. So I think if we let go of how we think it should be or how it should look and just focus on how do I want to feel. And, it's easy to discern in most instances, this feels good, this doesn't. So focus on what feels good and start allowing that energy to come into your space.
Now, certainly when people embark on what can sometimes be a very difficult journey, they do discover disappointment. That's inevitable. And I remember it's interesting when that happens how sometimes we'll lock onto that and hold on to it, and then we create what's called discouragement. And then before you know it, we have suffering because we're holding on to that. And that's certainly something you address very poignantly throughout the book. Tell us how we can kind of come to the point of understanding disappointment actually happens, but don't be discouraged by it.
Right. Well, the first thing that I was picking up as I was hearing you say that is people cannot disappoint us, okay? They may do things and we feel that disappointment, but no one can make us express the emotion of sadness or disappointment or things like that. We are actually in control of those emotions. Now, people can do things that trigger us, of course. Now, that feeling of disappointment, to me, sometimes is where it happens when we feel let down or we take things personally or things aren't going how we expected. And I think as a human, of course, it's perfectly normal. It's going to happen. But I feel like this is also what comes in with that heightened awareness, that consciousness. We say, okay, well, what was this all about? And maybe, this wasn't supposed to happen. And so feeling into everything that we are is essential. I feel too, Daniel, that there are no mistakes. A lot of people have regret and shame with experiences they've had. And I feel that if you can see what were the blessings in that, what did you learn from it, and turn it into an opportunity to learn and to grow, that the feeling that we had associated with it previously is going to shift. And even that's how we evolve, and that's how we become 28 days to a new you.
It's interesting you say that, Shelley. I remember my wife and I were having a marvelous conversation last month, and we talked about fear. And it was interesting to come to an aha moment about fear is actually the gift because it's showing an area that you need to strengthen. What are your thoughts on something like that?
I got chills with that, and Spirit gives me chills when it's truth and we're on target. So I think, first of all, that there's two emotions. There's love and fear. And any vibration that isn't love goes into that fear zone. So that's where we have the worry, the lack, regret, all of that other energy. Love is a space of trust and faith and so on. And so I feel that anything that we are worried about, fearful of, it's an opportunity for us to grow. And, of course, we can take action or not, but taking that time to reflect, to meditate, to spend time with ourselves and pay attention to what our body's saying to us can definitely be beneficial.
Now, being on our own, trying to create that change can certainly seem easy enough. But part of that also, when you begin to change, is the fact that you also have relationships that are connected to the you that's beginning to do that. And many times when people might embark on a new quest, let's say, for instance, you might be somebody who has decided, I'm thinking about being entrepreneurial and starting my own business. That's certainly a change. Of course, with that comes a learning curve of operating your own business and not being somebody who's a slave to your business. But here's the interesting thing. How about all those well-intended friends or family members? Well, businesses tend to fail at a rate, and you hear all these things as though they're really trying to prevent us from leaping into the fire, so to speak. That's certainly one of the steps you talk about in your book about relationships is assessing those things.
Yes, well, what's happening, Daniel, is it's fear. And it may not even be fear for you, but it may be their own fear of stepping into something like that. And so what I think is important, once again, is, you can listen to what they express, but it's up to you if you choose to accept it or receive it. And once again, it's not good or bad. It's just a matter of discernment. And the more that you decide what works for you, what's best for you, many times it's going to offer others that comfortability to do so for themselves as well. And it takes a lot of courage to be in this role as a human, to step into the unknown, to become a better version of ourselves and to allow ourselves to evolve and to change. And I think even time to time, assessing those relationships in our life is beneficial. And having boundaries is important, especially if we're feeling a little drained by certain people. And having boundaries can just be saying no when you really want to say no. And also allowing yourself to say, I really can't talk right now. This isn't a good time. Even though you do want to talk to them, you don't ever want to compromise yourself. And the more that you are invested in yourself energetically, the more you're going to have that energy to invest in other people and relationships.
I know one person comes to mind immediately as we talk about this, and that's former NBA superstar Michael Jordan. And you remember the time after 3 NBA titles, he decides he wants to go and try playing professional baseball.
Yes.
And here's somebody that really, imagine, we're just dealing with a community of our friends. This was a guy that was at a super level that probably had his fair share of people, and certainly people in baseball were letting him know, we don't want you here. Go back to what you do good.
Right. But the thing is he did it. He followed his passion, his dream, and he followed his heart. And, success sometimes, to me, is measured only in financial means. But to me, success is all of that. It's the health, the happiness, the well-being, and doing what you want to do. And so right away, he had the courage to go against the naysayers, so to speak, and just do it and go from there.
And I think what's interesting to note is we talk about desire, which is that particular thing that comes along and pulls us in the direction of our life's purpose. That's what I believe true desires actually are. And you certainly talk about that, but it's interesting when I'm sure when you've worked with people and you simply ask them, what is it that you want? And they sit there dumbfounded because a lot of us don't seem to feel like we know what we want. We certainly know what we don't want. There's that law of attraction again.
Well, I am definitely, especially when I have private sessions, I encourage people. I want to empower people. I never want them to give their power to me or to someone else. And so when they say, well, what am I supposed to be doing? I will say, what do you want to do? And they'll pause. I don't know. And I said, well, what do you like? What do you love? I definitely encourage you to spend some quiet time and see what comes up and just start writing it down. And I guarantee you'll gain clarity as far as a path that you will choose to follow.
I'm reminded of one of them television shows, the half-hour sitcoms, where a lady was waiting for a blind date to show up to pick her up. And it turns out that he's an Elvis impersonator. And at first you see this guy showing up at the door, and he's over the top doing all of his Elvis things, and I'm sure like a lot of people probably watching the show as well as her was thinking, this guy's off his rocker, right? So they go on the date, and of course he goes and takes her to a place that he performs as Elvis Presley. And realizes, wow, I've got this really cool guy that's doing this Elvis impersonation, really nice date, the whole bit. And afterwards, she goes back to the room where she finds the guy literally stripping down and kind of getting rid of all the Elvis thing and becoming a normal guy. And so she becomes inquisitive about that and says, what's going on here? And he says, well, I'm getting ready for us to go out and have dinner, And she says, well, what about all the Elvis thing? And he says, well, my performance is over with now. And she says, well, what was the idea of you coming to the door, the way that you did when you picked me up? And he says, well, I just kind of had to get in that zone, so to speak. And then she goes to question him about that, and he says, well, I've always wanted to be a performer and perform music. And she says, well, why did you give up? And he says, well, I really didn't. He says, I just changed my dream a little bit, but I still get to perform. I get to sing a lot of the songs that I love singing and entertaining people like yourself. And I thought, isn't that amazing how sometimes, as you were saying earlier, we have a desire and we make it out to be this thing, and we don't realize that just even putting our feet in it a little bit, even into the shallow waters, just for a while to get used to how good that feels, that it would encourage us to keep going further forward and even thinking bigger and bigger, because then you experience that it's possible. Does that kind of make sense?
It does, and as you're talking, I keep thinking of the book, The Power of the Heart by Baptiste Pape, and it's also a wonderful documentary, and it is all about him sharing, along with amazing spiritual teachers that are very well known, about how he decided he didn't want to be a lawyer anymore, and it just didn't feel good, and so he decided to write a book about the heart, do a movie about the heart, and he's following his dream, sharing that information with others.
It's always such an exciting thing when that happens. Now, as we embark on the quest of our desire, how important is forgiving and releasing in this process? I know people are going to think about that for a minute and think, well, that just seems like a paradox, but really there's a lot of truth behind that.
It is, and I was taking a big, deep breath as you were continuing to talk. I'll tell you, sometimes what is hanging on is it's not even that anger or frustration or hurt to others, but even against ourselves. So this is where we have to allow ourselves once again to see that there are no mistakes, to see that every opportunity is an opportunity to learn and to grow, forgive ourselves for what we beat ourselves up about, and just step into that new, fresh energy of starting again. And the same with relationships too. To me, hanging on to that energy just doesn't feel good, doesn't benefit anyone. In the same sense, you may not desire to have an interaction with those people again. And, once again, I don't feel like that's good or bad. If it's family, of course, you're still connected. But sometimes as we grow and change and evolve, which we were talking about earlier, our energy changes. And what vibrating at before, that frequency where we attracted those type of people, when we shift beyond it, we're going to attract new energy into our life. So by stepping back and allowing relationships to dissipate and even experiences to fall away without us honing on them and once again beating ourselves up, we're opening the door for new opportunities and new energy and experiences to come in.
I'm reminded of, I believe it's Dr. Hugh Lin who developed Kapono Poto. I'm sure you're familiar with that.
Yes.
And I think that was really an excellent, easy exercise for people to do when it comes to this releasing and forgiving. You know, as you embark on your desires, and certainly you'll find disappointments from time to time, not that you want to attract them, or you could be, but those are those moments where you pick yourself back up and you realize, maybe I went this direction, it didn't work out, but I'm going to go this direction now. And it's really interesting when people get into that particular space, that cross in the road, so to speak, and they begin to beat themselves up, as you were talking about. And this is what we're, I think, truly talking about here. The outside relationships can be daunting, but I think sometimes that real enemy is within, and if you can learn to release and forgive yourself as you embark on this journey and things don't seem to be working the way you would like them to, this is probably one of the most vital steps in your 28-day process, I would think.
It is, and that is a wonderful way you expressed it. I'll tell you, a lot of people, and this goes back to what we talked about initially, Daniel, is how people are conditioned. And many times people have been told or taught, or even by example, that once you make a decision, you live with it. That's the choice you made, that's the bed, and you're going to lie in it, as a metaphor. And I think that, you know, sometimes there may be an expense involved, there may be other things involved, but I always feel we can choose again, that there's always an opportunity to make another choice. And sometimes we have to experience what we're experiencing in order to have that contrast. And I think that happens more often than not, that universe always shows us contrast, what feels good and what doesn't. And we tend to go with what feels good. And I think that, you know, loving ourselves, seeing ourselves as that beautiful, miraculous creation that we are, not comparing ourselves. You know, in the marketing industry, they have really affected a lot of people, especially with the Photoshop and things like that.
Oh, yes.
And people start looking at themselves and saying, you know, wow, I don't look like that, and I am not that person, and you know, it really can play a toll on us. But I think if we're aware, once again, of how people are their own unique selves, and just quit comparing how you look or anything like that, and focus on how you feel. And if you feel good, then everything else is going to fall into place.
I think an interesting note, too, when you talk about how we tend to view ourselves, for instance, through the marketing economy, that one way you can find relief from that worry of thinking about what others are thinking about you is, the truth is, other people aren't thinking about you as much as you think they are.
Right. That's a good thing to say.
Now, I was going to say, you know, as we're coming to the end of the show here, is that how important is gratitude in this process?
Well, I believe gratitude is essential, and I think that the more that we express what we're thankful for, once again, this is law of attraction energy working. We're going to put that gratitude energy out and receive more blessings. And I feel like it's very essential to be grateful for those things that at the time we may not be so grateful for. But that's where we learn and grow, when we once again see the blessings within the challenges, and we say, you know, thank you for this opportunity to learn.
For instance, somebody may lose their job. They may not feel good about that. What's there to feel grateful for there? Well, let's take a real hard look at this. Did you honestly really love working there?
Right.
And then you realize the answer is no. Well, I'm grateful I'm not there anymore.
Yes. Yeah.
Amazing.
And I think, you know, in that moment, all you're feeling is failure. Or, you know, what am I going to do? How am I going to pay my bills? You know, that kind of thing. But I really think that there's a blessing there.
Well, you know, there certainly is, and it's interesting when you look back on your life how things always tend to work out, even in the moments when you don't feel they will. Isn't that amazing how that works?
It is, and I think, you know, I have to say the universe is always working on our behalf. Just sometimes we cannot see it as that. And when people have financial challenges, health challenges, so on and so forth, they just get caught up in that challenge. But I really feel like it's oftentimes a catalyst to bring us to something else and something better.
The book is 28 Days to a New You. Our special guest joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program, Shelley Wilson. Shelley, it's been a pleasure to have you with us today. Could you please give out information where people can find out how to get the book and perhaps a website that they can visit you and find out more?
Absolutely. You can visit my website at shelleyrwilson.com, and that's SHELLYRWILSON.com. My book is available through my website and also Amazon. You can purchase it as an e-book as well. I also have pages for my books on Facebook as well as the Shelley Wilson page. So I appreciate this opportunity, once again, Daniel, to share a conscious conversation with you.
Oh, it's always fun being mindful with wonderful guests just like yourself, Shelley. Thank you again for being on the program today. We want to thank you to listeners out there. You can also discover more by visiting us at Beyond50Radio.com. That is the number 50. We encourage you to sign up for our weekly e-newsletter as well to keep up to date with what's going on here in Beyond 50. You can also follow us on Facebook at our fan page at Beyond 50 Radio, as well as Twitter at Beyond 50 Radio. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program, and remember, live your day past halfway.